Good evening. And I'll be glad to help Milton or anyone else sign up for classes here at Miami-Dade College. It is my pleasure to introduce to you an editor, Robert Weil, tonight, and he in turn will be introducing our authors. Robert Weil is W.W. Norton's executive editor, editor-in-chief, and publishing director of Norton's Liveright and Company imprint. By any measure, Weil is a great editor. While his books and authors can range wildly from country western singer Merle Haggard to multiple works by scholar Henry Louis Gates Jr., Weil even published a book called Knitting with Dog Hair. He is best known for publishing serious works of literature and history. Whether it's African American, Asian, or French history, genetics, literary criticism, biology, fiction, politics, or philosophy, Weil seems to have edited a critically acclaimed and commercially successful book in those categories. Please welcome Robert Weil.
Thank you very much. It is just great to be here again, to be in Miami. I've introduced various other authors here, and it's my absolute pleasure tonight to introduce Larry McMurtry and Diana Ossana. Larry McMurtry, I consider the greatest bookman in America, not only for his extraordinary fiction, but he is probably the preeminent book collector in this country. And I feel it's a historic occasion that he's come to Miami. The last city that I appeared in with him, he said he hated that city, and he says he loves Miami. So, and I can already tell it's a great audience. And we're also joined by Diana Ossana, who is his writing partner, who's had an extraordinary role in Larry's life and in her own life. They are together the authors of the screenplay of Brokeback Mountain, for which they won an Oscar. But Diana also, after Larry had a heart attack, is hugely responsible for bringing Larry back so that he's a vital writer among all of us. And so it's really a historic, and I'll just say this. We speak of great world writers like Tolstoy. And I would contend that Larry McMurtry is on that level, a great American writer. And if you read something like Lonesome Dove, this is America's War and Peace in that it just chronicles a world that no other writer of the 20th century has chronicled so well. So.
Actually, it's America's, it's the West gone with the wind. That's what Lonesome Dove is. I've argued that for a long time. Gone with the Wind is not a despicable book. It's just not Tolstoy.
I would humbly disagree with you because I think you're closer to Tolstoy than to Margaret Mitchell. I was going to say Martha Mitchell, but
it's touch and go, Bob. It's really touch and go.
Well, anyway, the thing you'll find is that once you begin to paw at Larry, whom I've only known about 2 years, under a slightly curmudgeon exterior, is one of the most lovable people you will ever meet.
He's endearing.
The reason I was being a little nervous when I came on here was we were at a book fair in Chicago recently, and there was another awardee, and somehow or other in Chicago, what I had to say didn't seem to rank very well, and before it was over, I was sitting with my back to the audience, and there were 5,000 people in the audience who were hearing who were dealing with my back. Also, in the process of being old, I've become, you'll be surprised to know you've involved yourself in an infinite project tonight, because I can go up perfectly well, but I can't go down. I can't see below my knees, so it's very tricky. I can't do escalators anymore. I wouldn't survive a day if I had to use the kind of escalators that you get in the Miami airport. But to skip back to the fact that we're all here, I want to congratulate the city of Miami for maintaining such a wonderful tradition as this book fair, and for showing us the dignity and the beauty and the necessity of books. There's lots of talk about will the book end and things like that. I don't believe it at all, and I believe that events such as you've staged over the last week is one of the, was certainly helpful in keeping books central to our culture.
Larry, I agree with you. I think we're all deeply grateful to Miami, which is just a wonderful book culture. And we also want to thank Mitchell Kaplan, who just oversees all this and puts Miami on the map. Now, I figured we would start with a little bit on Larry and then on their partnership, and then go to just a little bit on the current novel, The Last Kind Word, Saloon, and then, go to some larger things. And we'll also punctuate it with two very brief readings from the book. But Larry, I know you're always asked this, but every audience wants to know this. When and why did you decide to become a writer?
I don't remember it as a decision. I went to Rice initially in 1954 as a very ignorant freshman from out in the bleak country west of Fort Worth, and I saw within a week that I was not going to ever graduate from Rice. Rice had a notorious course called Math 101, which not only slayed me, but slayed a whole lot of other people that ought to know how to do Math 101, but it didn't. So I gave up. It was the second year of my college experience. I moved to Denton and finished my BA at North Texas State, which was then a rather crude little teacher's college. It's now what you see if you happen to drive through Denver and get stuck. However, I was, by that time, I loved Rice, still think of Rice as my intellectual home. I was just there 2 weeks ago. It's a wonderful, wonderful school. And I came back to it eventually twice more. Once to get an MA, no math involved, and then I taught there for 9 years.
Larry, the audience probably will know the town you were raised, Archer City, from the last picture show. Did you know you wanted to be a writer then? What was stirring then?
I would have been very unusual if I had. There were no books in Archer City, no books in my family. I've told this in a book called Walter Benjamin at the Dairy Queen. I grew up in a totally bookless household. My father, who was a rancher, subscribed to a magazine called The Rancher, or The Ranchman's, and that was it. There wasn't even a Bible. But fortunately for me, in 1942, when my cousin, Robert Hilton, came by the ranch house on his way to enlist in World War II, and left me a box with 19 books in it. And these were just the standard boys' books of the time. But I read them over and over, and that was my library, really, until I got to Rice in 1954. I don't think I could have imagined being a writer, because I still couldn't even imagine being a reader. There was nothing to read.
Larry, hold the mic up close.
Okay, got to call the mic up closer. Okay.
Okay. Now, Diana, I think you came to the family maybe in the early 1990s, to the McMurtry family, but people often ask how you met Larry. Had you known about his writing? I heard something about a catfish restaurant. Can you tell us the story?
Well, I read Larry, started reading him in the early 1970s.
You did?
I've read All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers, which I love. It's probably my favorite book of Larry's. And about 2 weeks before I met him in 1985. I had just finished Lonesome Dove, interestingly enough. And I went to Mr. Catfish with some friends in Tucson, and Larry was there with friends, and our friends knew one another, and that's where I met him, at an all-you-can-eat catfish restaurant.
Well, there's a little bit of confusion here. You met him at a catfish restaurant, but how did a writing partnership, I mean, you've done Pretty Boy Floyd together, you've done Zeke and Ned together. Like, how does a writing partnership begin?
Well, Larry and I became friends after that. We kept running into each other socially, and he'd spend about 3 days out of the month visiting me at my home. And in 1991, Larry had a heart attack in August of 91. And he was in the middle of writing a novel. It was the Evening Star, wasn't it, Larry?
Yeah.
And they told him he needed quadruple bypass surgery. He said, well, I have to finish this novel first. So he made an appointment to get his surgery. I think it was on December 2nd, wasn't it, or 3rd?
December 2nd. I told him I'd
he
finish
finished
on
the novel on December 1st. He flew to Baltimore, Johns Hopkins, and had his surgery, which was quite successful physically. So he recovered fine and resumed his life afterwards. And about 2 months after his surgery, he wound up at my house on his circle around the country and didn't leave.
What do you mean his circle?
Larry he had this sort of routine. He would go to Houston, Washington, D.C., where he had a bookstore, Tucson, L.A., and then back again. He just did this sort of circle around the country, and he was very regular about it. He traveled a lot. He would drive sometimes, and sometimes he would fly.
It helped me fill the bookshop, essentially.
Right.
I bought a lot of books as I traveled.
Yes, he was a book scout. So when he ended up at my home, like I said, he didn't leave. He wrote Streets of Laredo at my kitchen counter. And then he stopped writing. And he read 5 or 7 newspapers a day. He stopped reading. He quit reading books. He quit doing anything except sitting on my couch and staring out the window looking at the mountains. And he did this for almost 2 years, and it was very sad. My daughter was a teenager then, Sarah, and one day she came to me and she said, Mama, it's really hard for me to look at Larry. He's so sad. It makes me sad. And hearing that, I just realized, something has to happen here. He had been getting screenwriting offers from some very prominent directors like Steven Spielberg and John McTiernan, and he just bat them away. And after about 5 of these, he got an offer from Warner Brothers to write a script about Pretty Boy Floyd. So I went out and I did some research, a bunch of research actually, and I had this big yellow pad, probably 20 pages of reasons why he should write this script, interesting stuff. And I sat him down one afternoon and I said, so I'm going to tell you all the reasons you need to do this. He thought that was funny. He just kind of looked at me like, what? So I started reading him these things, and about halfway through, I noticed there was a spark in him that I hadn't seen in a couple of years. Got all done, he looked at me and he said, well, I'll write it, but you have to write it with me. I said, well, we need to go convince Warner Brothers of that. So we did, went to LA, we wrote the script, and then as soon as we finished the script, we launched into the novel. We had so much information still in our heads, we couldn't stop. We couldn't stop writing. 4 months later, we had a first draft of the novel Pretty Boy, and the rest is kind of history.
Well, I think it's kind of remarkable. It is because I think, Larry, you can talk on this. Many people don't realize how having a serious heart attack can really just stop you from doing other things. You've spoken about that.
I've spoken about it and I've written about it. I wrote a famous letter to my cardiologist at Johns Hopkins after 4 years, in which I was a very sad person, as Diana has described. Major surgery, in fact, even minor surgery, some of you will have had it. If you think about it, I think all surgery is transformative. Let them sniff your appendix out. Why do you need it? Maybe you don't. However, when you let them begin to remove body parts, you have a serious operation, that part of your personality is gone. It's not coming back. And the technology of the bypass in those days was very severe. It was only possible because there was something called the heart-lung machine, which cardiologists will tell you doesn't really function like a heart or pump like a lung. And the traumas that I've tried to study this a little bit, the traumas that I've witnessed, a lot then depended on how long you were on the pump. President Clinton was only on the pump 77 minutes. I was on the pump 112 minutes. And I had a worse recovery than President Clinton, who didn't have an easy recovery. Nothing is easy when you get at that level of heart surgery or any surgery. It just transforms you. You have to realize you don't really have the same personality, the personality that's been yours for a long, long time.
I think you came back, one, because of your drive and determination and having Diana, and only in the last 3 years, Larry has married again, and he's married to Faye McMurtry, who is Faye Kesey McMurtry, and even since then, with a new wife, he has just a whole new vitality and energy.
Faye is like a gift.
Faye's amazing.
Oh, she's
We'll get
wonderful.
into that later.
She's wonderful.
Okay, we'll get to that when we can.
I want to get into the novel. Larry published a novel in May of this year called The Last Kind Word, Saloon. It has been an enormous, phenomenal success and a New York Times bestseller. It has blown away everyone's expectations, and it's sort of signaled that Larry's novels go so deeply into American myth and American storytelling. So getting into that, Larry, why did you come to write about Wyatt, Earp, and the OK Corral, that over any other story? What was going on there?
Well, they were available. I'd written about them before. I didn't pretend to be writing anything definitive. I don't think it's accessible, anything definitive, but I was not interested in Wyatt Earp at all. I was interested in the prose of a great prose master named Max Beerbohm, who in the Edwardian days, and a little bit more, was an absolutely wonderful, delightful satirist. And The Last Kind Word, Saloon, is, I call it a prose, I don't know, it's called prose something, and it is. It's an exercise in Edwardian prose. It also has the incidents of, say, the end of the cattle trade, but I had already been over the end of the cattle trade time and time again and didn't have to do very much in that line. It was a tribute to Max Beerbohm, really, more than anything else. Now go read him.
Larry,
Some of you.
I'm going to ask you to hold the mic very close to you.
Go read Max Beerbohm.
Thank you. Now, we're going to go into a reading from the novel in just a second, but I realize that you may think it's, Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, the dentist turned gunslinger. Should people look at this novel as history the way it is, or how should they approach this novel? Like, are the traits that you have in the novel who they are?
They should approach it like they should approach any book. If it interests them, read it. If it doesn't interest them, don't read it. It's I'm very practical about it. I never think of my books once I publish them, unless I need to write a screenplay, and that's happened quite a few times. But normally, no, I write it and I'm gone. And it's gone. It's not lingering around in my subconscious somewhere. It's gone. I finished that.
Larry, you mentioned a key word about it, satirical. There's
Yes.
something anti-hero about it.
Yeah, well, satire used to be a very respectable branch of literature. We have, our satirists would be Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller. People like that were satirists. J.D. Salinger was a satirist. But it saddens me that nobody knows the work of Max Beerbohm, but I could say that probably about 150 people. I could reel them off and you wouldn't know any of them, even though you have all these books in this grand building. So it was a lament, a kind of lament, for a vanished kind of literacy, which I don't think exists anymore. It's not there.
It's a very funny novel. I mean,
It's a very funny novel. Satire doesn't need to be bleak or black. It can be funny. In fact, most satire is supposed to be funny. That's why it's satire.
I think in order, I don't know if this reading is quite satire, but we should probably break right now for one of two readings. And Brad Beckman, who is an actor here, who has lived in Texas, will read chapter 18 from The Last Kind Words, Saloon. I'm sorry. Yes, Brad Beckman.
Chapter 18. Goodnight had scarcely swung off his mount when Mary Goodnight burst out of the shack she used for a schoolhouse and gave him an enthusiastic kiss, startling the three towheads Mary had been teaching and probably startling several of the cowboys too. Kissing like that didn't occur every day in the Paladuro area. Odd how women changed, he thought. The several years he spent wooing Mary, he had never been allowed such an aggressive kiss. Often in those days, Mary would turn her head at the last minute, leaving him with only her shoulder to kiss. It took you a while to drag yourself back here, Mary told him. We hung two horse thieves on the way back. That slowed us down, he said. He knew at once the comment was a mistake. Mary jerked back as if she'd been courted. How old were they, Charlie? She asked. Old enough to know right from wrong, he said. Answer my question, Mary demanded. She was beginning to color up. 21 at least, he told her. There were no trees nearby. We caught them with the stolen horses and hung them from a telegraph pole, he said. I don't think it damaged the pole. You ruthless bastard. Who made you a judge? She asked. But we caught them with the stock, he stammered. Mary's rages, and they were not infrequent, always baffled him. He had no idea what to do about them. This is a raw place, and you're a raw piece of work yourself, Charlie Goodnight. Well, I've not had your education. I was talking, she said. Please have the courtesy not to butt in. I wish you could bring those boys back to life, but you can't. So I'll give you 10 years, if I can stick it out. 10 years to do what? To make this into a proper county, with judges and courts and all that goes with a county. And after the courthouse, I want a college where people can learn their algebra. Do those two things in a timely fashion, and maybe I won't leave you for brighter climes. Not many climes are brighter than this place here, he reminded her. There is hardly a tree in 30 miles and very damn few clouds that could create cool. Don't quibble, Charlie. It don't become you, she said. She turned to leave, but stopped again. Did you bury those boys proper? She asked. Goodnight wondered how he could have blundered so. It was not the first time either. We were in a hurry, he mumbled. Well, those lucky boys, they'll never have to be in a hurry again. She looked hard at the towheads and walked away.
I was rereading your novel this morning, and you probably say I shouldn't because you never look back, but I was. And I was so struck, as I am by all your novels in this reading. You have this remarkable ability to depict female characters and to render them with such sympathy. I don't know of another male writer, a contemporary American novelist. And it runs through all your novels. And here it's Mary Goodnight. I mean, it's Aurora Greenaway. There are all these. Where does this come from? You seem to describe your women better than anyone.
Well, I don't know. You could not get argument on that. I don't think about it much. I spend my life with women as much as I can manage. And it seems a sensible thing to do. They're a lot more fun than men, and a lot more instinctive than men also. So that seems natural. I came from a family where the women were dominated by my grandmother, who had come in a wagon from Missouri to Texas in the 1870s, had 12 children by a drunkard as she was making her way over, raised them on a bare prairie with nothing in the way of ornament at all, and she was implacable. I never even heard her speak. She had already finished speaking to children and little boys and stuff like that. So I came out of a female-centric society, although it didn't look like it. I mean, the images of the cowboy were everywhere, but it was the women that seemed to make things work. So it seems natural to me.
Well, you know, we get asked that question a lot. Where,
Sure
you
you
know,
do.
how do you understand women so well? And he'll look over at me, and I just say, you know, I said this once, and it's just the truth. He knows his female characters inside out, upside down, and all the way around. But when it comes to women in real life, he's as clueless as the next man.
Well, now you live about half the year. Larry and Faye live half the year with you in Tucson, and they live in Archer City as well. Like,
Well, we travel back and forth together sometimes, but we're all together most of the time.
well, what do you mean he's so clueless in real
He
life?
just is. He, you
How?
know, he's like Goodnight was in that chapter. You know, if we try to tell him things, and he just sort of is taken aback and startled by it and confused, and he's just like any other guy.
Can you reply?
She's probably right. It's not something I think about a whole lot. I'm surviving, she's surviving, we're surviving in a family-like way, sort of. Faye has come into our lives as a huge benefit, and children and dogs, and it all seems normal to me, as normal as I care to be.
I mean, Diana, you seem to keep it all together with, what, 7 dogs? Your own children, your sister's children whom you've raised, Larry and Faye, and you're this sort of Wonder Woman who keeps this whole band together.
I don't know if it's Wonder Woman. I just sort of take it one day at a time. You know, it just is life. They've come into my life, and I love them, and I care about them, and, you know, we just do it, like I said, one day at a time.
It's kind of Tolstoyan if you think about it.
It's what?
Tolstoyan.
How's it Tolstoyan?
Well, Tolstoy lived that way in a great house in not too far from Moscow, with all sorts of people. He had 13 children, but he also had girlfriends, and he had hunting companions, and some lived there for months, some lived there for years. It's kind of similar.
So if you're so Tolstoyan, can we count on you sort of in, you know, when you decide it's the last year of your life to ride the rails and end up somewhere, God, like, will you, you know, do that kind of story?
I don't want to be dead at Ostapovo. That was such a terribly sad thing. The Tolstoys had fought bitterly for the whole 48 years of their marriage. But the marriage had lasted 48 years, and somehow, in some form, unfortunately, they had a bitter fight. The Count decided to take himself away, and he had too many fights with Sonia. So he got about 25 miles to a little railroad station, and there he died. And the Countess came over, hoping he would let her talk to him one more time, but he didn't. That's the realist in Tolstoy.
Larry's right. It's probably one of the most dramatic literary deaths that I know of. It's 1910, and Tolstoy is like the most famous man in the world. And he's run away, and this countess is trying to get into his house, into the station master's house.
That's right. It's just a little
Now,
depot.
Speaking of Tolstoy, I just see in your works, and that's why I don't think you're like, Margaret Mitchell, I'm sorry. You can render people whom other people would treat like trash with such dignity. I'm thinking one of your most favorite of the novels you've written, Desert Rose. Harmony, if any of you read Desert Rose, remember, is a stripper. In Las Vegas.
More than that, more accurately, she's a showgirl.
Okay.
She's a showgirl.
She's sent to be a stripper, yes.
She had been the greatest stripper of her age. But I have always been drawn to vanishing cultures, the cultures on their way out. Cowboys. Spent a long lot of my life thinking about cowboys who were long since a vanishing species. Showgirls. When I started wandering around Las Vegas, I'd been sent there to write a screenplay about the real life of showgirls. And a showgirl was a large-breasted woman who did pretty much nothing but wander around stage dressed in feathers. That had been the staple of Las Vegas life for a long time. And the woman I eventually created, because I couldn't find the reality of her, had been Miss Las Vegas Showgirl. She's who they trotted out if Elvis came to town or Frank Sinatra came to town or whatever. But tide turned in Las Vegas and they started wanting small-breasted dancers. And so Harmony, my wonderful character, was washed up. And now I am seeing something like that, unhappily and unfortunately, another culture on the way out, and that's booksellers.
Booksellers are like a vanishing breed.
They're a vanishing breed. A lot of them have vanished in the last 5 years. In America, in England, it's just a hard economy for booksellers. I frankly, I have a bookshop because I want a bookshop and I can afford it. If I couldn't afford it, I wouldn't have one, but I'll always have one because I think it's a wonderful culture. It's very important. It nurtures so many beginnings that people who start in a bookshop and become the head of Microsoft or anything like that.
Larry, you mentioned Harmony being a famous showgirl. There is a courtesan in the Last Kind Word Saloon named San Saba. Is she one of your favorite characters?
No. I thought it would be fun to make up a little Turkish girl who had been raised in a harem with 50 eunuchs and put her on the Great Plains, and someone who would be attractive. I'm kind of attracted to continental manners, particularly English. There used to be a great character in world finance called Jimmy Goldsmith. This was 15, 20 years ago. Jimmy Goldsmith was a very dapper man who had a wife in England and a wife in France. And it was not hidden, there was nothing secretive about it. When he wanted to be in France, he had one wife, and when he wanted to be in England, he had another wife, and that worked well. And he died a happy man.
See what I mean? That would make any woman mad.
Well, I followed Jimmy Goldsmith as best I could, and I'll say one more thing about the Desert Rose. I wrote the Desert Rose in only 3 weeks. If you catch the right voice, you can write just about as fast as you can type. And I caught the right voice, and 15 days later, I had the Desert Rose. I'm certainly in my top 5 of my books.
And I would say if you do reread The Desert Rose, what Larry can do with the most characters other people would not render sympathetically, he renders with utmost sympathy. Now, Joyce Carol Oates, in an amazing review of the current book, said this is an anti-heroic novel, comically subversive, and she called it a ballad in prose.
No, I called it a ballad in prose.
You called it, you're right. You called it ballad, but she called it comically subversive. What did she mean by that?
Ask her.
Well, I wish you were. Diana, what do you think she meant?
I think what she meant, and Larry doesn't do that intentionally, it's just how he is.
It's the fruits of my reading,
It's a satire, like he said. It's a satire.
I think I've been a credit to my education. I say this because my grandson now is on the road touring with a band of his own, and he's really a credit to his education. And my son had a different kind of education. But it's very important how you get educated, how long you stay, how deep you study. Oh, very important. If I hadn't gone to Rice, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you about Anna Karenina or War and Peace or anything. I would have become a vet or something.
Larry's also read more than anyone else. He's reviewed, I think you've written 3,000 book reviews in your life.
About 1,000.
My daughter calls him a database with an opinion.
Now, one more heroic reading from the book at hand. I think this is a scene which I found truly terrifying. And just to give you, this is probably one of the, not the comical scenes, but why don't we have one more reading on chapter, go into some other general things before Q&A. Brad?
Oops. Chapter 30. Sultry nights and lightning were bad things on a cattle drive, Goodnight knew. He insisted that his cowhands keep their horses on a short rope at such times as a precaution against stampedes. It was the right thing to do, but not all cowboys were wise enough to do it. Some were unable to sleep with the horse practically right over them. Goodnight was renowned in Texas for his vision, which few could equal. Once his own wife, Mary, held up a cattle drive for several hours because she and the trail boss thought they saw Indians. Goodnight arrived, glanced at the Indians, cussed for a while before informing Mary and the trail boss that what they saw were a pair of yucca plants. Goodnight's hearing was the equal of his eyesight, and on this particular night, it was his hearing that saved him. To the west, he heard a thunderclap, and the sky went white with lightning. Before it fully darkened, the cattle were up and running. Goodnight yelled a warning, then he swung on his horse and ran. The thunder in the heavens was soon drowned out by the hoofbeats of thousands of cattle. The stampede filled the plains. Cattle were running on a front 50 miles across. What Goodnight knew that the cowboys didn't was that 3 huge herds were stampeding. His, a herd belonging to cattleman Shanghai Pierce, and one belonging to Dan Wagner. There could be as many as 10,000 cattle running, maybe more. Some stampedes could be turned if the cowboys were skilled enough, but there was no turning this mass, Goodnight knew. In a lightning flash, he saw Bose 50 yards away and running for his life. Blue balls of static lightning ran along the horns of some of the cattle. Goodnight's deep-chested gelding, Mackenzie, he was named for the great cavalry officer Ranald Mackenzie, had as much wind as any horse. Goodnight was no trained bareback rider. He could only cling to the gelding's mane. If he fell off, he'd be dead. Fortunately, the plain was level with a few dips. At the castle, the women sat on the unfinished porch chatting late. Nellie made a few notes. She intended to write about the now-abandoned castle. "You don't know what a luxury this is for me," Mary said. "Having women to talk to? Talking to Charlie is much like talking to a stump." San Saba was weaving. Abruptly, she stopped. "What is it?" Mary said. She suddenly had the sense that the earth itself was moving. The porch they sat on began to shake a little. "It's cattle," San Saba said. "We best get in that tower Benny had built. Quick." "Good Lord," Nellie said. She could just see a kind of mass to the south. "Quick, quick, quick," San Saba said, pulling Flo with her. She began to herd the women up the stairs into the strange tower Benny had built. She was just in time, too. The cattle began to surge through the castle, smashing the great table. A steer tried to come up the stairs behind, but his long horns wouldn't allow him into the stairwell. "It's a flood of cattle," Nellie said. The whole castle shook from their passage. Just as Nellie thought the whole structure might collapse, the tide of animals began to ebb. The lightning still flashed, but not so close by. The distant plains danced with the lightning. In one of the flashes, Mary saw Bose carefully making his way through the remnants of the herd toward the castle. "Trust Bose to come through," Mary said. "Charlie says he's the best cowboy there is." "Even better than himself?" Nellie asked. "I don't think Charlie considers himself a cowboy. Charlie mainly considers himself a boss." It occurred to Mary that Charlie might be dead. He had told her so many times that anybody can be dead, and dead any day. It could just be a matter of a man's luck running out. In the lightning flashes, she could see the carcasses of a dozen cattle or more trampled to death by the surviving herd. Mary got a lantern going, and the light caused Bose to lope over their way. "Glad you made it, Bose. "Where's Charlie?" Mary asked. "Don't know," Bo said. "He was riding bareback off east of me. Then I didn't see him again." Mary felt a stab of fear. Her husband might well be dead. For all her griping, she really did love him. "He might have gone back to try to find his saddle," Bo said. "Anybody killed?" Her imagination was in full flower. She was imagining her husband dead. Nellie Courtright had the same thought. Lord Ernle, Bill Cody, and now Charlie. "Could you go find him, Bose? I'm plenty worried," Mary said. "I'll find him," Bose said. "Probably just looking for his saddle." "And hurry, please," Mary said. Bose nodded, but he didn't like to hurry. Once he was out of sight of the ladies, he slowed down and took his time.
Brad, thank you very much for your readings. I want to get to more contemporary things that the two of you have been working on. We touched a little bit on Tolstoyan characters like Harmony the showgirl, and the two of you wrote Brokeback Mountain, the screenplay. What was it, 2006 or 7?
No, we wrote that in...
No, but the movie, what
Oh,
year?
the movie was 2005, and then the
Oscars were 06.
06.
See, I don't think people realize that this is all before gay marriage and everything. You guys were the first. How did this come about?
Well, I read the short story in the New Yorker. It was given to me by a friend of mine who was staying at Larry's house at the time. He was a writer as well. He just handed me the New Yorker and said, "There's a story in here you ought to look at." Didn't tell me what it was about. And I have insomnia, so I was up one night, not sleeping, and I read the story, and it was devastating. The version I read is different than the one that Annie published at Close Range. That one has a little preamble. It's a sort of an italicized thing that gives you a hint of what the story's about, but that wasn't in the New Yorker story. And so it wasn't until I got to the tent scene that I realized what the story was going to be about. And I realized then, too, this was 1963, what was going to happen to these young men. And by the time I got to the end of it, it was like somebody struck me with lightning. I knew it was a powerful story. I knew it should be out in the world somehow. And I thought the best way to get it out there was as a film. You know how you read something and you want everybody you know to read it when you love it? It's something that's amazing, it's really affected you. I just felt like that was the way to get as many people as possible to experience this story.
What was Larry's? Tell her what happened then.
The next morning I got up and I handed Larry the New Yorker and I said, "You need to read this short story." And he said, "I don't want to read that story." I said, "What? Why?" He said, "Because I don't like short fiction." I said, "Why not?" He said, "I can't write it." And I said, "Well, just humor me, will you?" So he went upstairs, read it, came down, and he wasn't talking, which is unusual for him. He didn't say anything. And I said, "Well," and he said, "Well, it's one of the best short stories I've ever read in the New Yorker." I said, "Well, do you think we could write a screenplay of it?" And that was the first time, and probably the last time, he agreed with me right away about something. And we wrote Annie a letter that day, a little fan letter. We got a letter back a week later, and she said, "I don't see a movie here, but have at it. Have your people call my people," and
we did.
we did.
I recognized right away, I was stunned by the story for several reasons. One, I don't know why I didn't write it myself. There was a little bit of envy working there, because it's a story that's been hanging there to be written for a long, long time. And when you start thinking about your life in the West, I thought of several people. I mean, my family would not ever countenance the fact that a cowboy could be gay. It's beyond them. They can't deal with it. But I knew several people who were gay, on the fence, I'm not quite sure, and including some that we had worked with very closely for a long time. It was a great tragic story, but it happened over and over again in the West. And there'd only been very faint foreshadowings of it. I think Bret Hart had a story called My Bunkie, which was a little bit like that. And of course, the circumstances in the 19th century, 2 or 3 cowboys would be left with, herding questions or responsibilities, and there they'd be with my, two blankets and the wind to deal with. So I just thought that this was absolutely a great story, and certainly we should try to get it as quick as we can. We did.
We optioned it with our own money, $10,000.
How long did it take for the movie from the time you recognized it?
Almost 8 years to get it made.
I mean, I don't think you know what happened, but it's kind of, both of you are heterosexual. And, it's very unusual a story about gay cowboys in the 1960s, is it? It takes a certain...
They weren't really cowboys. They were wannabe cowboys. They were
They
sheep
were
herders,
roustabouts or
Yeah,
men of
they
all
wanted,
work.
but they wanted to be cowboys, like a lot of young men do.
Because their alternative would be the oil fields, some kind of farming,
Right.
but probably the oil fields.
Larry, could this story have taken place in the 19th century at all?
Yeah, it could have, but it didn't. Not that I know
This
of.
is what we deal with as editors.
Well, I'll look up My Bunkie. It's got the sort of outline of the revelation without going quite one more step, which Annie Proulx took.
Speaking of Brokeback versus your novels, and you actually, I know you're interested in this topic, what are the challenges of writing for film versus fiction? I know you like that topic.
Money.
That's it?
But that's the most significant difference.
Well, you told me on the phone you wanted to talk about this topic.
I did. I just said nothing.
Oh, but it's much cheaper.
Yeah,
To write a novel.
Fiction is a cheap art. I'm lucky. If I get an idea and I want to write a book about Billy the Kid, a story about Billy the Kid, all I have to do is, get a little typing paper, my trusty typewriter, and maybe in 3 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, maybe two months, maybe 5 years, I can have a story. But I don't have to raise any money in order to get to the first step, like hiring a director or choosing an actress or getting a crew or something. I talk a lot more about movies, we do, really, usually, than we do about anything else.
But
because
Larry,
there's so much to talk about.
the darnest thing, you will sort of tell me, like it's like a character out of your book, you'll say, why do you? Money. And then you do something with the most profound implications, and just,
Well,
it's
but
the
you have to-
opposite, it doesn't seem like it's money.
Okay, but if we hadn't had that $10,000 and sent it off to Annie Proulx that day, we would have lost it to a Czech director. It was look at movies. Movies can be an art. They are held together by a variety of crafts, and they're also an industry. That can be said of writing. You've got to have all three parts: the industry, the crafts, the art, and the director or the writer or somewhere. It's very much more complicated, and it ultimately, time after time, depends on money. We have a couple of things that have already been bought and paid for that have not been to the screen because the producers, the studio, has not been able to find the actors that could help them finance the movie. All these years, and the star system is still the best way Hollywood has of funding movies. It's too bad, it's tragic, but there it is.
I think before we go to a little bit Q&A, tell us what you're planning to do next. Are you planning to write another novel? Are you two planning a screenplay? What should we expect?
Well, we're always, I think, we're trying to work in screenplays as much as possible because you get paid, and that's the reason. And Hollywood has gone through a change in the last 5 years. We've all witnessed it. I lived off Hollywood for 45 years. Never had any trouble getting a job. Might be cheap, might be expensive, might be good, might be bad, but there was always work. And then all of a sudden, about 5 years ago, there was no work. And
Well,
what
it was
the-
no feature film work. That's
No
really,
feature
really
film-
gone
no
down.
feature
There's
film work.
a lot of television work.
a lot of television.
A lot of the very good things have gone to television.
Yes, it's
Yeah,
because
I-
they can reach a wider audience, mainly.
I think television has got it. You know, they're doing better than movies. They're smarter. They're more. You know, they can deal with longer themes. They can do amazing things. I'm not troubled by this change because I just assume work in television is work in movies, and so fine. We have to write. We have several projects at the moment involving television. Maybe they'll work, maybe they won't, but that's where we've gone.
But there are two of the three that we have right now we really like. The third one is just okay, but the pilots we've written are really, really funny and dark.
Well, I hope some of you saw the movie that Frances McDormand had on television only 2 weeks ago.
Olive Kittredge,
Olive Kittredge, wonderful.
Won the Pulitzer, the novel.
she's
Wonderful. Yeah,
amazing
right,
in
right.
that. It's so good.
She got the novel. She got control of it, and she made it. It's a wonderful, as good as anything on the screen right now.
Larry, any urgencies right now to do anything? Any regrets right now, or you're doing exactly what you want to do?
Yeah, I regret that the book business, the rare book business is becoming so difficult, and so many people being forced out of what is a really a delightful way to live. Now here we are. We have a great book festival, and long may you survive, but it doesn't answer, you know, the needs of antiquarian booksellers worldwide. Just doesn't.
Yet you are a model, and both of you, to us all, and I believe it will persevere. I don't think our need for the great story to be moved is suddenly extinguished.
Well, things go back and forth. You know, you can't say, yeah, never say never is a very good mantra, because, you know, we've seen things happen that we never thought would happen. I never thought Terms of Endearment would happen, and it wouldn't have, except for Jack Nicholson deciding to be in it at the last minute. It was about to be canceled. And that was by one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, James L. Brooks, producer of the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
I think we have time for two quick questions, and this is always a terrific audience here.
I can't see, somebody have to translate.
Why do you think The Last Picture Show turned out so well? Were you there when it was filming?
I was not there when it was filming, but I co-wrote the script, and I can tell you rather precisely what the deal is there. It was an amazing fact of a right director getting the right material at the right time in his career. Any earlier, he could not have got the job. Any later, he wouldn't have wanted the job. Peter Bogdanovich was a great student of television acting. And the brilliance of The Last Picture Show is that he got minor actors to give major performances. Just for that one time, Cloris Leachman, Ben Johnson, Ellen Burstyn, straight on through, the casting was perfect. It just was perfect. And then, of course, a paradox, he got famous, and he started working with stars, didn't want to work with anybody but stars, and they were all bad.
And the reverse accident wasn't because John Wayne said no to something, you wrote a great novel?
A novel that I would put up there with Gone with the Wind.
Briefly tell us that story, what happened with John Wayne.
I don't know it firsthand. Peter Bogdanovich has written about it in his new book on John Wayne. His new review of the new book on John Wayne. We wanted to write an end of the West Western in which we used 3 stars, their careers as Western heroes, and bring it all to a resounding close. The stars we wanted were Wayne, Stewart, and Fonda. None of them liked the script at all. They did not want the Old West to end. They didn't want it to have a last adventure. If it had to have a last adventure, it should be a resounding triumph, which it wasn't. But eventually Stewart and Fonda agreed because they weren't working very much. John Wayne worked till the day of his death, and he never changed his mind. He just didn't like it, and he didn't do it.
And you wrote Lonesome Dove.
Well, yeah, but Lonesome Dove, that's the second time that's come up. There's going to be an auction for PEN, the writers union that I used to be the president of. It's going to come in December, and the cataloger for Christie's said that that the Streets of Laredo didn't get made. It did get made. It got made by Diana and I for television.
As a
10 years later.
miniseries, but what Larry did with Lonesome Dove, that script was only about 75 pages, wasn't it, Larry?
It was short.
He bought the script back from Warner Brothers, wasn't it? He
Yeah.
bought it back for a fee, so he'd have the rights, and then he wrote the novel Lonesome Dove.
Yeah. It was complicated, but it did get made as a miniseries.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, there are three, if you think about it, Terms of Endearment, Last Picture Show, Lonesome Dove, these films, it was the perfect confluence of director and actors,
Yep.
every one of those. And it's just such random luck when that happens, but with his, it happened every
Yeah.
time.
Happened 3 times.
Actually, this leads right into my question. Number one, big fan of Lonesome Dove and also the miniseries. Two-part question. The first part is, how amazing is it to have somebody like Robert Duvall bring one of your characters to life? And number two is, do you have any stories of being on the set of Lonesome Dove in the miniseries? Thank you.
Well, I can take care of that quick. I was never on the set of Lonesome Dove, and I haven't seen it.
One more question, right here. Can you speak up or
Not
go
to say anything bad about Robert Duvall. He's a great actor, but I never saw Lonesome Dove and was never on the set.
Yes.
Well,
I
when we
would
first
write-
how did we write together?
Yeah.
When we first started, with Pretty Boy, I write on a computer, and Larry still writes on a manual typewriter, much to my annoyance. But at any rate, back then, he would write 5 pages a day, which is pretty much his routine. And he'd stop in the middle of a sentence at the end of the page. He wouldn't go any farther. But he did that every single day, 7 days a week, holidays, Sundays, didn't matter, until he'd have a first draft. So when we worked together, he would do his 5 pages, he'd give them to me, I'd put them in the computer and alter them, change them, maybe not change them, and then I'd move forward, and then the next day he would start again. I'd spend the rest of the day doing what I do, and then he would go. That was at the beginning, that's pretty much how we did it, but now we kind of write in tandem, side by side. It's evolved, but back then that's the way we did it.
Thank you.
Yes, I want to thank this wonderful audience here. Miami is extraordinary. And also, thank you so much to Diana Ossana and Larry McMurtry for coming to Miami.